Okay. So what is, how do we live? How do we think about living in the next 40 years? And so we have Terry DeMeo from the Battleship, North Carolina. They're doing a really interesting project up there. If you haven't heard about it, it's fascinating. How do we be proactive? What can we do? And Terry's going to talk to you about that. The project is called Living with Water.
That's right.
So let me get your screen up here.
So, development director of Battleship, North Carolina. I realize I put everything on my cover slide except for my name or my position.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Terry, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
See if the little clicker was working for me.
It should.
For me.
Yeah, I believe it is.
But I have a background in environmental policy. So a portion of my career is in environmental science. And then I kind of moved into, consensus-based decisions and politics. And not that those two things are compatible. But you know, you can have science and you can have everybody agree on the science, but until the public is willing to accept the science and make movement on it, you know, it's hard to get changes made. And now this portion of my career has really been in finance and fundraising, because you also have to have money to implement the policies. So I wanted to tell you about Living with Water. I really thank you for the opportunity to share this story with you today. For those who are not familiar with the Battleship, here we go. Okay. It's the big one, big button. Right arrow button. There we go. So the Navy transferred the battleship to the state of North Carolina in 1961. It remains today here a popular tourist destination, a really beloved historic and cultural artifact, and a significant contributor to both the local and the regional economies. We have about 250,000 visitors a year. The past 2 weeks, we've had 1,000 people a day. This battleship, which positions us to be able to really kind of use that opportunity to share our story with a lot of people that come from all over the place, all over the world. We are birthed, the battleship's birthed about 28 miles upstream of where we're sitting right now. It's on the Cape Fear River, and I'll move back, on Eagles Island, and it is opposite the city of Wilmington. It is surrounded by 65 acres of state-owned tidal marshes, shorelines, woodlands, and parklands. And it is also, with the image on the right, hydrologically contiguous to the more than 2,000 acres of tidal wetlands and intertidal shoreline on Eagles Island. All three rivers that surround Eagles Island, so let's see the Cape Fear River, the Brunswick River to the west, and then the Northeast Cape Fear River at the top of that image. All of them are tidally influenced. But almost interestingly enough, or ironically, where the battleship sits, we are at the very top of the estuary for the Cape Fear River. And so although we're tidally influenced, we're not really sure if the salinity in the river can support voices, as have been talked about so far. However, I personally feel that that's changing as the saltwater wedge gets pushed further upstream. So over the last 63 years, the ship has experienced all weather events. But in 2015, we began to see changes in the climatic conditions that impacted the ship, that endangered our sensitive marshlands and that threatened the visitors' experience. High tides, unrelated to storms, this is our parking lot, were more severe and way more frequent. They swamped, as I said, our parking lot area. They sheet flooded our only access road, and saltwater inundations began to kill our 60-year-old live oak trees. The chronic tidal flooding also threatened our business. And this is why it threatened our business. By law, the battleship receives no regular revenue from the state. So all of our operations, so that's salaries, benefits, toilet paper, lights, all of that, including all of our regular maintenance, has to be paid by law out of visitor receipts. So if the visitors can't get to the site, which this is again our only access road, if they can't park once there, obviously the parking lot did not have that level of water in it when that visitor parked there. Or they can't walk to the visitor center without getting wet, our business model is in trouble. So in 2018, we undertook some field investigations to determine the conditions at the battleship and to also develop some design options. We investigated geotechnical conditions and completed site condition surveys. We hired NOAA to provide baseline data such as real-time GPS, supported topographic surveys, drone surveys of existing wetland vegetation patterns, and digital elevation models. NOAA also installed some water levels and salinity recorders to determine if tides rather than rains were creating the flooding on site. And they did determine that that was in fact true. So NOAA also determined through these studies that the water levels at the ship are identical to those recorded at the tidal gauge, which is what the little arrow is pointing to. That tidal gauge is located at the foot of the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge. It's about a half a mile downstream of the battleship. So during that time, I spoke with a lot of community groups about the significant impacts of coastal flooding. And in response, I usually received a lot of polite, nods, but sort of blank faces. And it made me really curious about, was our flooding really getting worse? And if so, by how much? And using the observed tide record documented at the downstream tidal gauge and the National Weather Service's flooding event definition of those floods, those tidal events that are 5.5 feet and higher, those they define as flooding events. I conducted a frequency analysis. So when the data showed an over 7,000% increase in flooding events at the battleship since the battleship arrived in 1961, it changed the dynamic of the conversations that I was having at those community presentations. People's eyes started to get really, really big. So the last full decade shows the real impact of climate change on rising sea levels. The battleship property was flooded nearly 1/2 of the days during 2020. So battleship leadership decided to not build the hardened wall recommendations that some consultants were providing us. And instead, they chose to mitigate flooding impacts through nature-based infrastructure by restoring habitats and making space for the tidal inundations. And that decision launched the Living with Water project. The project has 4 main elements. The first element is replacing about 800 linear feet of hardened shoreline, hardened and eroding earth, I would say, with a living shoreline. And that would help us restore, that's what we're hoping it looks like, would help us restore a lot of nursery habitat. So backing up, the living shoreline is runs from, I'll just point here, from about here all the way along to east of the visitor center there. So the second and third elements are to remove about 2 acres of our parking lot. And it's 2 acres of flood-prone parking and creating a marsh, wetland, and tidal creek habitat, which is designed to capture and hold and infiltrate and direct the high tides back to the river at low tide. And the third element is elevating the remaining parking lot and improving that area, including the installation of bioswale for stormwater management. So we had our groundbreaking on February 8th of this year. And we realized that we're not the only site impacted by climate change, obviously, and rising seas and flooding. And because we're not the only site and a lot of concern is out there, we've received a lot of bipartisan support for the project and a lot of interest from both researchers and funders. We did have a golden shovel at our groundbreaking, but we instead gave out golden buckets, thinking that that was appropriate for flooding. We planted spartina in our little golden buckets, and we had one for everybody who attended. About 55 people attended our groundbreaking ceremony on February 9th. Construction began February 7th, and of course it began during a king tide flood, because that was appropriate. And this is the living shoreline construction. These large blocks were removed. That's kind of what that looked like. And the shoreline then was secured the very next day. So this is sort of a pre-construction image of the wetland and tidal creek and parking area. And unfortunately, elevating the parking lot meant that we were required to lose the remaining trees in that area. However, the construction's moved really, really quickly. This is, March 7th. It looks super messy, doesn't it? And but you'll notice changes to the shoreline elevation of the parking lot here on the left, and the wetland area sort of mid-slide, and a little bit of the elevation along the right hand as well. And this photo was taken just last Friday, and you can see that the site is really starting to shape up. So rising sea levels and tidal flooding are a concern for obviously most coastal communities. We realized that we have the opportunity to offer this approach as a model. And part of doing that is monitoring our site, both pre-construction and post-construction. We wanted to monitor and track flooding, water quality, vegetation, and wildlife habitat improvements. So we have 3 labs with UNCW that are under contract for biological monitoring, and NOAA is under contract for the physical monitoring of this project. And I mentioned that there were 4 elements for living with water. So the 4th element is education and outreach. Again, we've got 250,000 people that come through every year, sometimes 1,000 people a day. This is a huge opportunity for us to try to share our experiences and our project, what we're doing here, and just the notion of the seas are rising, things are changing, and it's good for people to pay attention to this. We've developed a story map that features interactive maps, graphics, audio clips, time-lapse photography of the flooding that we have on site. And it's captured a lot of attention. In fact, recently I was contacted by the Climate Resilience Program Coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, because she wanted to know how we did our time-lapse photography for their on-site flooding that they can place in their story map that they have built as well. So we've been working on lots of different outreach vectors, including hosting the North Carolina Science Festival on site, conference presentations, community speaking engagements, academic articles and scientific and industry specific publications, as well as podcasts, newspaper and television coverage. We were fortunate that the environmental reporter with the Washington Post, the National Environmental Reporter with Washington Post, released an article January 1st that went nationwide. We've received a lot of attention since that happened. And finally, we intend to extend our educational commitment by entering a long-term collaboration with UNCW to develop a living laboratory in the battleship. And that's to help foster research and educational opportunities for undergraduate and graduate students to focus on marsh and riverine and coastal issues. We are going to be there, you know, for the future, and we have opportunity to offer a location where students can, in 15 minutes, get out to out into the field. We are a stable place where monitoring devices can be installed, although we do have a lot of visitors. There's a lot of opportunity to install in places where visitors won't tamper with them. And in fact, I just last Friday heard from one of the researchers at UNCW who said that they had installed a water quality monitoring device there that had a little tag on it that says, you know, this is property of UNCW. If you have questions, call this number. He received a phone call. It was from a guest at Battleship, a woman who was bringing her first and second grade students from a nearby county, who said, we saw your water quality device and we have questions. So he did a pop-up lecture to first and second grade students there about water quality, about climate change, and about what they were doing there on site. So UNCW developed these little vests that they can wear while they're out there. And that's living with water. Any questions?
Thank you. Take care. One question while I switch. We'll get.
Well, I will, you know, the river's been dredged, what, 12 times over the years, right? Right, right, yeah. And, we are very sensitive, obviously, to the dredging and recognize that part of what we're experiencing is probably because of the changes to the river. I mean, the river has been changed to become a very small straw, you know, that allows those big gushes of water to come upstream during high tides very quickly, and a lot of water. And so, you know, obviously additional dredging is a huge concern for us and for the city of Wilmington as well, which also experiences flooding.
Yeah, it's cool. Some of the things that they're doing, we're doing here, right?
Yes.
We're, you know, it's you're out, you have use UNCW. We actually know a lot of those people.
Yeah.
But we, you know, that we just don't have the vests.
Not yet, not yet.
So guess what? We're doing Monday. So thank you very much.